Good morning, everyone. We're ready to start our session. I'm Denny Moen. I'm a local AFCEA chapter member and a volunteer to help moderate this section. I joined the local chapter in the summer 1969, so I have 56 years in AFCEA, and I guess I do the sales pitch to all the young soldiers here. It was been a wonderful experience for myself to be part of AFCEA. Many conferences, many opportunities to network and meet not only my fellow soldiers, but to meet those in the industry that are trying to help us be successful. This is a special session for me personally about the electromagnetic spectrum. You know, I have engineering degrees, and physics hasn't changed the spectrum ever. And so it's about what can we do to manage it properly and correctly. One of my very first assignments in the Army, the organization doesn't exist anymore, but was with the Army Security Agency. And that was about managing the electromagnetic spectrum. So it's a special activity, and I'm not going to say anything or introduce our panel. I'll let that happen. Those of you that are looking for credit for in attendance, I remind you, and you probably experienced this already on the way out, you can flash your little badge and get credit for attendance. The session is recorded, and so when we get to questions, answer period, I'm going to use this mic, and I really would like the question to be on the mic so we get it fully recorded. And I'm going to turn it over to our panel leader and sit down myself.
Good morning, everybody. This is my name's CW5 Travis Eason. I'm the new CCOE Chief Warrant Officer under Major General Janovic. Today's topic for this panel is the electromagnetic fight, transformation, and contact. As was alluded to just a few minutes ago, the EMS is an environment that's always been important for a wide variety of reasons. When it comes to war fighting, it's a central component of success or failure. If you can own the spectrum and you can modify your systems to adapt well within that spectrum, you're generally going to find yourself ahead of the adversary. So I got a pretty diverse panel here across the board. I'll just do a quick introduction, mainly name and where they're from. We do have one other person that may show up here a little bit late, but we'll go ahead and proceed without him for right now. Second from the end, we have Colonel Andrew Baer with 18th Airborne Corps. To my right, I've got CW5 Rick Godfrey, the CCOE seated. I've got Sergeant Major Nicholas Perez Santala, ForceCom Spectrum Management. CW3 Alex Torres with 3rd Corps. CW2 Brett McCaskill, 3rd ABCT, 1st Armored Division. And on the end, I've got Captain Jacob White with the 75th Ranger Regiment. So what we'll do is we'll have each panelist do a 2 to 3 minute intro of what they want to bring to the audience, and then we'll cycle into some questions that I provide, and then we'll provide some time for the audience to ask some questions as well. So we'll just start down the line with starting with CW5 Godfrey.
Hey, good morning, everybody. So CW5 Rick Godfrey, cyber seated, it's capability development integration. So we are the people in the Army who really look at designing, building new capabilities across the forces, do a lot of requirements writing, things like that. So getting into transformation and contact, it's really an exciting and new concept that the Army started probably just about a year ago, whereas what we're trying to do is, instead of doing a traditional process of build everything out and then get it tested, we're really just kind of throwing concepts out into the field, giving it to the soldiers so they can use it. And it's not just about the material aspect of it. It's not just about the physical equipment. It's also changing the Army's formations. And so you've probably heard about like the multifunction reconnaissance companies, the multifunction brigades, all those concepts. So it's the full dot mil PFP of how the Army is creating and building capability. So it's a really exciting time, and I'm so glad that we can come up here and talk about this and share some of our insights that we have.
How's it going? It's CW3 Taurus, Alexander, Alex by short, 3 Core. We're the typical bridge to the end user for this transformation contact, right? We receive things, and we're really to advocate for the Army community and the unique needs, right, that transformation contact needs to meet in order to achieve some of our unique capabilities we bring to bear. More of an advocate, right, for the leaders up here to get us the equipment for our down trace units. But excited to be here.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing? What's that? Hey, Sergeant Major Nick Perez. Many of you know who I am, for better or for worse. I am the Senior U.S. Army Spectrum Manager at United States Army Forces Command. Also serve as the TAC C4 Division Sergeant Major. Excited to talk transformation and contact, electromagnetic spectrum, with this panel of really, really awesome spectrum professionals. And if you know who I am and you know what I say, I'll be focusing on EMS and how we enable freedom of maneuver in the spectrum for our blue and blue forces throughout the Army. So I'm looking forward to the panel. Thanks for having me.
Good morning, everyone. I'm CW2 Brett McCaskill. Most of my knowledge base for this is just the amount of time I've spent beating Sam McCormick with his own EWPMT, and then advocating for things for my armored unit. I was not technically in TIC, but I was working with Major Norton, who's in 13ID. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here. We did go through Spectrum Blitz and JMRC and try to work through some of these innovation problems. So that's the knowledge base that I carry for this panel.
Good morning. I'm Andy Bear, 18th Airborne Corps G39/SEMA Chief. A couple things the Corps is working on. We do Scarlet Dragon exercises several times a year. So working through the technical side of connecting sensor to shooter with EW systems, and then also bringing in joint EMS data. And then at the Corps, we have the 4 subordinate divisions, so 82nd, 101st, 10th Mountain, 3rd ID. So we've been involved with the MBCT design, the ABCT TIC that's going on right now, and then the next round as we start going into TIC with the IEW battalions.
Morning, everyone. Captain Jacob White. I am clearly not Command Sergeant Major Malone, who is sorry he could not be here today. I think one of our unique mission sets as an infantry regiment is just we have 1 foot in the special operations community and 1 foot kind of in the big Army and participating in the next fight. And what does that look like? That creates an interesting challenge for us, as we have at the regimental level and then down at the battalion and even at the platoon level, we're frequently dealing with things that multi-star staffs are working on at the same time. And so one of the interesting things that regiment brings to a panel or a fight like this or a conversation like this is the ability to talk to leaders at the lowest level and individual rangers, but it also presents a unique challenge in that you have many junior rangers that are interfacing directly with senior leaders and decision makers. And so that presents an interesting challenge and an interesting opportunity to create a positive feedback loop to actually iterate on change very quickly.
All right, thank you, panelists. When we ask these questions, just keep in mind the answer is unclassified. So my first question goes to Colonel Bear. TIC units are often focused on rapid experimentation. Can you describe the process your unit used to identify an EW gap, rapidly prototype a potential solution, and assess its effectiveness?
Yeah, probably one of the best examples. I think it was one of the brigades, 101st, going through TIC. The equipment they had available to them, the TLS Menpack, the EWPMT, 2XI, and then experimenting with the force structure as part of the mobile brigade combat team redesign. So they went through multiple iterations of what does that EW platoon look like? Where does it reside? The design eventually went towards like what they call it, a multi-domain company. So where you're putting your UAS operators, your EW, your scouts and snipers all together into one company that would essentially be in that recon forward role on the battlefield. To test and experiment with that concept, they were signed up for, or they had a scheduled JRTC rotation. The design they built was more than what was currently in the BCT MTO. So they really took 2 brigades worth of EW platoons and equipment to JRTC, fought it in that new concept, and came back with a pretty good report about what they were able to achieve.
Thank you, sir. Just a follow-up portion of that question to CW5 Godfrey. How does that contrast to the process that you see in and through the CDID?
Right. So the CDID follows a very formal process that involves the JSIDS process, ACIDS, requirements council oversights, and it's really we're looking at a capability that starts at a fairly lower TRL level and works its way up through the system, and that process traditionally takes anywhere from 5 to 8 years usually to go from, hey, we think this is what we want as a capability, to now it's getting in the hands of the soldiers, right? And it's not just the equipment development, it's everything that goes with it. So all the training, do we have to restructure, organize the Army? How is this going to work across all Army formations, not just an EW formation, right? So what does the signal piece of that look like? What's the transport piece look like? How much does it weigh? How is it cooled? All these things. So what we're doing is we're just handing capability, and he mentioned the EW Manpack, the Beast Plus, and so we just basically handed a commercial off-the-shelf solution to soldiers and said, here, make this work. And so they ran into a lot of problems with it that we knew would happen because we didn't go through the entire process. But at the same time, they're telling us what it needs to look like so that when we go through the process, we know where all the shortcomings are going to be. So it becomes a really interesting concept in the Army of how that works.
Yeah, thank you. So to kind of join with that question to Captain White, what unique challenges did your TIC unit encounter when attempting to rapidly field new EW capabilities, and what innovative approaches did you take to overcome those obstacles?
Yeah, thanks, Chief. Oh man, that's rough. Can you still hear me? I'm going to speak away from the mic so that yeah, awesome, thanks. Oh, thanks, sir. We're here, TIC exists because there are a lot of gaps in the EW force. I think everybody recognizes that at this point in time. We have to accept as the Ranger Regiment and as any unit in the Army that there are things that we can control and we can't control. And so our focus in the regiment has really been on the things that we can control, and then working with USASOC and our higher headquarters, working with the PM shop, working with the CDID to be able to get more resources and get more opportunities to experiment. I would say that our best way to work through innovation and solving problems with new equipment and taking existing equipment that we can repurpose with new ideas is one. I think we find that generally innovation is happening at the lowest level. The individual Rangers, whether they're in an EW platoon, a cyber platoon, or in a rifle platoon, are coming up with the ideas. And so we need to encourage that. I think one of the strengths of the Ranger Regiment is you have a series of leaders who are willing to give subordinate leaders and subordinate Rangers the opportunity and the power and the authority to actually rapidly experiment with new ideas. And that's through just the myriad of exercises that Rangers are constantly getting put through. And then I would say the last thing that Regiment really excels at, and I know I've seen a few scrolls in the crowd as I walked in, is that Rangers are very, very competitive. And so I think the competitive streak within the regiment, and people, whether it's, again, a rifle platoon that wants to beat their sister platoon at platoon live fire, or whether it's the EW platoon wanting to figure out how we solve higher level problems that are going to impact the battalion and the regiment, that competition is really helpful in trying to figure out and iterate on some of these issues.
Awesome, thank you, sir. The next question goes out to Sergeant Major Perez. It kind of links with rapid experimentation. How is spectrum management approaching the rapid procurement, prototyping, and changes needed in the EMS-enabled systems to outpace adversaries?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Chief, for the question. So I'm sure everybody here, it's softball. So I'm sure everyone here has had a frustrating experience, right, with being able to radiate on a piece of equipment that they want to use. It's really all about ensuring you have the right people at the right time during the process of acquisition or of experimentation, right? There are unique ways that spectrum managers can go about getting equipment cleared for use depending on the parameters of how you want to use it. A lot of the time, our problem isn't a military one, right? It's a bureaucratic one and a policy-driven one based off of national policies from agencies external to the Department of Defense. And we are beholden to that process to an extent to ensure that we're protecting safety of life, safety of flight with radiated EMS across military installations, and then as we do exercises outside of military installations too. It is not the process of going to your spectrum manager and saying, I need to do this next week, can we do it? And I think, you know, the profession gets a bad rap because a lot of times we are in an environment where commanders expect things at the speed of need, and we are reactive to that as opposed to being proactive to it. So we're seeing a lot of development now, at least from my angle, where we are including spectrum managers early and often in the process, where they can educate program offices, where they can educate PEOs on things that are required to get equipment, let's say, thumbs up to be able to at least radiate. But the misconception across the force now is immense. There is a lot of misconception on what we can and can't do. As an example, from a UAS side, right, with the blue UAS list, people think if it's on the blue list, they can use it. Yeah, that's true, but you don't have frequencies to use it with. You still have to do the frequency coordination for that. And while it might seem arduous, the answer isn't to cast aside the staff sergeant in your battalion who's responsible to process those frequencies. You've got to bring them in and allow them to leverage the network of finding the path to yes, regardless of what the commander's intent is, right? And sometimes that's a hard thing to do, to include, hey, we have this great piece of equipment, that commercial off-the-shelf piece of equipment that's assigned to our unit. How do we turn it on? Some people just turn it on. And that works for a while, right? But what I'll tell you is the spectrum manager isn't just responsible for making sure that there's no interference and that you can turn something on and you're in compliance with regulatory things, right? But a big part of the spectrum manager's job too is to protect the commander, because they're not coming to me to find out if I authorize them to turn it on, right? If you're out in the continental United States, and I say that on purpose because this gets exponentially harder when we're talking about operations in the Pacific or operations in Europe. But in the continental United States, we have a little bit more leeway to work with those who are responsible for it. And like I said, there are times where the FCC comes down and asks who's radiating this, and might end up fining the DOD a hefty amount of money because you're radiating a piece of equipment you're not supposed to, and took out LTE for the region. And that fine goes to the DOD. And they're not hunting for Sergeant Major Perez, I promise you that. So I have to make sure, and the spectrum managers throughout the force also have to make sure that at the very foundation of what we do, it's protecting the organization and protecting our commanders for something that could be a very serious incident.
Thank you for that, Sergeant Major. That leads into another question. Sorry to double tap you, but considering the speed of technological change, how do we ensure our EMS-focused workforce, primarily 17 and 25 series, have the abilities and training needed to stay ahead of emerging threats?
That's a little easier. Thanks. So everything I just said is true. However, I think we fall into bins of understanding, let's say 17 echoes and 25 echoes, thinking that those are functions. They're not. It's not deny a potential adversary access to the EMS and enable freedom of maneuver in the EMS, which is how I would bin 17 echo responsibilities and 25 echo responsibilities overall, right? We have to start thinking as maneuverous from the aspect of supporting the commander's intent towards whatever the objective is, right? Captain White talked about the regiment and how they get after things and their levels of acceptable risk that might not always apply to other units up here on this panel, right? But what you have there is buy-in from the population to move and converge on the X, whatever the proverbial X is, right? When we talk about multi-domain operations and large-scale combat operations, we're not talking about an exercise in the back 40 of your military installation. It is a lot to consider when you're talking about freedom of maneuver. So how do we do that, right? I think there's opportunities for us to include right here at Fort Gordon some kind of field exercise between 17 echoes and 25 echoes very early in the stages of initial training. That'll at least allow for fair, respectful understanding of what each is responsible for. And then when they go out into the force and they find themselves in SEMA cells or in G6s at echelon, it's not something new, right? You don't have a 25 echo in a SEMA cell who doesn't understand what their roles and responsibilities are to the SEMA cell in coordination with the G6 spectrum manager when we talk about access to the EMS and then developing courses of action for potential denial of the EMS. So we got to blend together a little better. Everyone gets inside of their rice bowls and flies their flags. There is no flags to fly except for the Army one. And I think if we think of it like that, then we stop being protective of a function and we all start working together to converge on that X.
Thank you, Sergeant Major. That's really insightful information. Appreciate it. Next question goes out to CW3 Torres. What types of EW formations beyond traditional units do you envision being necessary to effectively operate in a highly contested electromagnetic environment?
So that's pretty a deep question, right? I think we're on the first iterative step, right, with this T-list man pack. I think it's a piece, right? And I think we need to shift to a multi-layered approach akin to IADS, right? You have your close, near, far, bubbles of protection, right? So we need to kind of align EW in that same construct. We can defeat power with distance, right? The closer we can get something transmitting, the less power we have to do and the more barrage, less technical based jamming. So those delivered effects, right? Gaining that line of sight, right? So those airborne platforms I think are critical, especially when we're looking at that depth and breadth that we need at an armor formation, right? Physics doesn't change, right? So we need to understand that to be effective in an armored formation, we have to outmatch our direct engagement weapon systems. So if it's under 5K, it's not going to be integrated into the battle space as well as we need it to be. Secondly, I think this has been on the topic before, is like that edge compute, edge defeat mechanism, right? This transition, especially digital systems, have been mitigated. The threats emerge and changed in weeks, not months, not years. So we need that ability to identify and develop countermeasures, especially with that cyber-delivered technical-based effects, right? That transition from analog to more data-driven control and techniques isn't going to go away. So the more ability we have to do it at that forward edge, the better equipped we are for those threats that are only a couple lines of code to change. And then Lastly, I think it's I think we have to kind of get away from that every formation has to be this one solution is going to be the solution for the Army, right? I think we're doing that with our innovation and getting equipment from partners and getting it issued to the soldiers, right? We need to identify what's right, and we need to not be kind of constrained by, hey, this system has to be across the Army. This is the answer for every formation, because every formation is different. And if we don't have that flexibility and adaptability, then we're just hampering ourselves for the next fight. Pending any questions, that's all I have.
That's a good lead-in for the next question for CW2 McCaskill. What role do you see for artificial intelligence and machine learning in automating EMS-related tasks and enhancing decision-making?
It's going to come down to, it's kind of leads to the other question I'm expecting. It has to be a level of AI that is both dumb and smart at the same time. Talking about the jack of all trades, master of none, an AI that can focus on just finding out what's in the battlefield, pull that information, send it backwards, then get an update from Intel systems is really all we technically need from an artificial intelligence system. If we were to be able to solve that, however that works out, it solves the problem of one, putting ourselves into one pigeonhole of a system that says it can do everything, and then two, provides that immediate actionable intelligence to the front line. I think one of the biggest problems we face is we get all this information up at the top. Maven is a great example. And then it doesn't go down into the company level where they can action it. So if we can find something that does that, specifically it does a ingest, send, and then receive. That's really all we need.
Yeah, I think AI/ML automation, when it comes to speed, that's definitely a winner for what we're trying to get after. Speaking of technologies, the next question I have is for CW5 Godfrey from the seated perspective. What emerging technologies beyond software-defined radio do you believe hold the most promises for revolutionizing EW EMS capabilities?
So that's a huge question. So when you look at the technologies and where we stand currently, I think it's pretty common knowledge that we're kind of behind the power curve when it comes to having EW capabilities across the force. So any technology that we're using becomes the next and greatest thing. So when we look at software-defined radios that can do multiple functions, besides just hey, it only runs in this frequency bandwidth versus I can reprogram this thing. There are SDRs out there that have the capability to go from like 100 kilohertz all the way up to like 72 gigahertz. So how do you deal with something like that, and then looking at the apertures that are required for those frequency ranges, and then really getting into some of the stuff that's sitting in a lab at DARPA. So like one of the things that like I'm excited about is quantum sensing, and it just completely revolutionizes how we're going to do electromagnetic support in the future. But there are several technologies out there that are like that, and we're always interested to hear what the next thing is and what a lot of our industry partners are working on, and how we can incorporate that into the next Army 2040, Army 2045 concepts.
Great answer, thank you. The next question was actually for Colonel Like, but he's not here, so I'm going to hit Colonel Bear up. Surprise. So the question is, what current policy or acquisition hurdles are most significantly slowing down the fielding of innovative EW capabilities?
I would say all of them, right? Because I think it was a couple of years ago, General Milley made a big statement about the acquisition process. So for 7, 8 years, we've been working on how do we streamline that process. I think at 18th Airborne Corps, we've taken one of those steps. So 18th Airborne Corps is building the JIOP, Joint Innovation Operations Center, right? So it's going to be there on Fort Bragg. It's got soldiers coming in with their ideas. We've got industry partners that'll be there on a daily basis to help work through the technology thing. And then the key piece that's coming in are acquisition folks with authorities and dollars, right? So that's the only really way we're going to speed up that process is putting the soldier, coming up with the requirement, the technology and vendors there with the acquisition guys and the authorities and the money all in one location so you can actually get to something much quicker. We took a step with the TLS Manpack, so we bought a commercial off the shelf, put some sustainment dollars behind it and issued it to units. But we're doing that over years instead of months. So part of it is what's the capacity that industry has to produce and how quickly. But bringing all those people together is where you'll actually shorten that 7-year process.
I think everybody laughed in the room because we were talking about DoD spectrum supportability, which is what I dream about when I go to bed at night. But what I will tell you is that it takes investment, right? We mentioned speed of need before. It's about getting equipment and being able to use it. It's about investment from all aspects of that. It's not just the acquisition cycle, right? It's not just middle tier acquisition. It's not just rapid capabilities office. It takes a village, and we need that commitment not only from industry, who's trying to give us awesome things that we want to get from them, right? But having that commitment to also work with the FCC so that we can use it. It doesn't have to be, we can initiate DoD spectrum supportability on a commercial off-the-shelf system, right? Which is designed to what? Ensure that there's no harmful interference with other Blue Force equipment that we use. But if you got something and you want us to use it, the FCC offers plenty of opportunity for commercial entities to get a green light to radiate, and that has nothing to do with the military at all. So those things can happen in tandem. Again, a little more complicated when we talk about operations in the Pacific Theater or in the European Theater or in CENTCOM. However, knowledge is power, right? There is no in this discipline. There is just a longer path to yes. But everyone's got to be looking for that answer. It can't just be on the shoulders of one person.
Thanks, Sergeant Major. I'm going to let Chief Torres do a little bit more information on this one, particularly when it comes to policy. Do you see any gaps or things that are kind of lagging behind that could potentially be modified and speed things along?
So regarding the policy, right, and I know Sergeant Major's going to hate me for this, right, but my time at NTC, right, we have a lot of people come bringing exquisite capabilities to try to integrate, to test and validate their unique niche that they're trying to fill and what gap they're trying to. And a lot of it, and we had a great spectrum manager that I worked well with, Rob Koffel, and he never wanted to say no, but sometimes you have to, right? They're beholden to the FCC, FAA. They didn't have 7.11 authority, so the ability to transmit. We did own a little bit more spectrum at NTC than the typical home station, right? But we still had to go through the Army frequency management, Army spectrum management, and that was frustrating. So like that policy, and especially, I mean, just from my perspective, is very vendor-centric, right? So we talk about this innovation, and I know Sergeant Major's like edging to come over here and come over top, but he's probably the expert, right? I guarantee. Let me finish my perspective, and then you can just stomp me down. But from what I've seen, as far as the 1494 authorization to transmit, is vendor-centric, right? So we talk and expound this innovation that we want to bring down to the lowest echelons. And I don't have an SDR that has a 1494 approved or the easy button to start that process, without the hammer of flag officers to try to drive it down from potentially a year process, CONUS, right, to 6 months. We were burning rubber, getting something from nothing to a stage 2. So that policy is. I'll come back to say some more, but I'll let Sergeant Major, hammer it.
Thank you, Chief. So I hear your point, right? And I hear it all the time. And you're not wrong. And when did those requirements happen at NTC, right? Maybe a month before they wanted to come on a rotation, maybe.
So the good news with we had 3ID come through. They wanted to use their DRES, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
they decided
third ID.
We haven't talked.
Here we go.
It's all their fault, you know. But we started working because I knew the friction with trying to get equipment running. We had multiple vendors bring stuff over you can't even turn on.
Yeah.
So like, and I told them, hey, you want to do this? Let's start working on this process.
So that's right. It's personality at this point, right? They could turn it on. That they didn't do what they had to do. They didn't pay the FCC for a license to be able to turn it on. That again transcends the DoD. But maybe nobody knew to say something like that, right? Again, 1494. We could talk about flag officers and general officers getting in and hammering down the table. Unfortunately, this supersedes the Department of Defense. Right? The Secretariat has no authority on NTIA or FAA or the FCC. So any Chief of Staff of the Army could make a phone call, and it's not going to make it go any faster because we don't get to make their priorities. We don't get to prioritize our actions for them to do. And we always fall into this cycle of, well, who do I need to call? Well, who do I call at NETCOM to fix this? It's like, you could call General Barrett if you want, but it's not going to change where we're at in the game. Now, getting ahead early, having these conversations much earlier, right? Here's the problem. When somebody needs a resource for execution, it's normally told to them, I'll be very honest, depending on what echelon you're at, it might be told to you 2 weeks before. Hey, we're going to NTC and we're bringing this out. That's if that, and that's rough, right? I could tell you that I would do everything in my power to make sure that you could radiate, and you don't need to know necessarily how that got done, right? But as long as it's ethical, legal, and moral, it shouldn't matter, right? But you could turn that piece of equipment on. If we're worried about making sure that we can do those things, and it's not always going to happen that I have a requirement a week from now and you're going to be able to turn it on, right? But if you're not including the people who can influence that from the very beginning of the conversation, then you're always going to find yourself 3 steps behind. And those people, those flag officers and general officers, they're going to do one thing. They're going to hurt the life of the G6 who's responsible to get frequency clearance, and they're going to be running 1,000 miles an hour, but they're going to run into a wall because they weren't brought in at the very beginning. And that's the culture we've got to change. All parties have equity. It's the staff collaboration between the 2, 3, and the 6 that require us to have and maintain decisive dominance in this space. And we got to get better at that.
No.
I don't disagree that what you say is true. It happened, but it could have been prevented. But you don't know any better on how to prevent that in the future. And I hope that going forward, we can ensure open kimono. This is how we get this stuff done. And you know what? Sometimes it might be no, but 90% of the time it's going to be, I can't believe you figured that out.
No,
Hey, team, I'm going to go ahead and
we weren't going to talk that much longer.
yeah, we're going to cool it down a little bit. Hopefully the next.
We're not fighting.
No, I think it's a great discussion. We just got to push through a couple more questions here and then give the audience a chance to ask some questions for hopefully as lively feedback. So this one goes to CW2 McCaskill, and it's related to EW and signals intelligence. Many EW systems rely on detailed signals intelligence. How can we better bridge the gap between SIGINT collection and rapid EW response, particularly in contested environments?
The simple answer is remove signal intelligence. No, so, sorry, bad joke. So this is the thing that's been the problem since I've been in for 29 series in 2015. So what does SIGINT do and what does EW do and how do we separate that or join at the hip? The problem I've had with this is it seemed like I got better results the more I focused on my mission and removed to an extent SIGINT and let them do their piece, and then we shared at the middle at the table when we did MDMP. So I do think there is something like the TLS when it first came out. We tried to put everybody in what felt like a Stryker minivan, facing backwards, and then said, you're going to share screens, but also don't pass that airport curtain because you can't see TS. Obviously, that wasn't the answer. We moved on from that. And this goes into what I said about AI is we need to figure out what it is that we want to do and then do nothing else. Separate what the mission is for that soldier, and all the extra onus can go to another topic. So for example, if I know that I need to do a certain level of suppression of the EMS to provide SOSRA for the armor unit going to push through that objective, as say a really heavily fortified defense, I need to focus on just the EA portion of that mission. For that, I need power. I need to know, get the information from SIGINT, that's where the connection goes in, on what they know is going to be in that area, and then feed it into my system, then focus on that mission. So that's part of how we can do the integration, which is funny enough to separate the integration. The other thing is understanding that I don't need to know everything about the signal. I just need to know what the signal is and if it's bad. I don't even know if it's BPSK or ASK. I don't need to know the modulation of it. Leave that to the AI. Leave that to the system to decide this is what this is and what it does, and let it decide how to defeat it. A system can figure it out in probably 0.5 seconds. It's going to take me on my little kneeboard pad inside of my whatever vehicle they decide to give me roughly 5 minutes to go through the math. So in order to fix that integration, circling right back to it, is figure out what the mission is that I need to accomplish, focus on that aspect of the mission, and then leave the rest for later.
A great answer. I'm going to go ahead and share that same question with Captain White.
Oh, wasn't expecting this one, Chief. Thanks. So I think the regiment kind of took compared to many other Army units, took a slightly different approach. I think part of this was informed by some of our peers in the Navy and the Marine Corps that take a more unified approach to SIGINT and EW. I think the way the regiment currently trains its SIGINT and EW forces is they go through a unified, standardized training pipeline for the collection piece. And so what we see is that I have a series of Rangers that are trained to conduct a mission. That mission can be a Title 10 mission or a Title 50 mission. It really just depends on what we are operating under and who we're expected to report to based on the mission set. They're authorized and trained to conduct that mission, whether they, depending on, again, who we're reporting to, whether it's a 2 or a 3. And where we separate is the requirement, like Chief was talking about, where SIGINTers are going to be much more focused on the analysis at the end. And doing analysis on like identifying the variations and working with the agencies that they need to work with to figure out specific details about the signals and how they work, and how that can feed a more national collect apparatus versus EW, which is going to be more effects based. And how do I pivot from a collect mode to something where I need to have an effect on an environment? And so kind of taking the best practices of where the SI community has really led the way for a period of time in developing standards and guidelines and in training and collection, merging that with the best practices that are coming from the EW community, and then separating that when we need to. So, and we've been reasonably successful so far.
Awesome, thanks, sir. I'm going to pause here for now. We got about 15 minutes left. Rotate over to questions from the audience.
All right, so a modification. So when we're talking about electronic fight transformation. So the question I wrote down, what efforts are being pursued by your organization to execute ES as an element of lethal effects, extending the ability from visible detection to sense?
Chief, I'll jump on that one. So, Major, I can tell you what we're doing, what we're experimenting with at 18th Airborne Corps. And it's about connecting that sensor to shooter link, right? So during our Scarlet Dragons, we're putting the beasts, the Krakens, the Tuzai out there, bringing in that near real-time sensing. And in the brigade right now, that's an SBUE network on IL-2. So that comes up to the brigade, to the division on SBUE. At the division, we're working through a cross-domain solution and bring it up to IL-6 on the SIPR, get it into EWPMT. At our last Scarlet Dragon, we started bringing in joint data feeds from the EMS through Link 16 So through subsequent iterations, we'll start overlaying the air piece with the ground piece. Once we get to a geo in EWPMT, what we're doing is I'm pushing that straight to the target workbench, left-hand column to vet validate. The next step is the FAO looks at it, verifies, hey, it's HPTL. We are going to expend rounds or expend rounds against this. And then it goes off to the shooting unit, right? So we are starting to make those connections from the EW sensor up to EWPMT over to what we're using as the COP Maven, and then straight to the shooters. Is that what you're getting at, Sergeant Major?
Hey, I'll jump on that too. So CyberQuest 25, we were not just looking at, hey, can I sense the signal, can I identify the signal, but then how do I turn that into an actionable target by passing that information to a FATADS? And then also last week, incidentally, we just had a non-lethal fires integration summit down at the GCC where we brought in, the Intel Center, we brought in SMDC, we brought in ADS, CFT, and the fires community to sit down with them and sort of discuss, this whole process that your question is based on. So it's very forward in our minds that we understand that it doesn't do any good just to see a target, but you've got to be able to geolocate it and get that over to the decision makers so that they can action it.
Just one more. So in 3rd Armored, over in First Armored Division, we're playing with the idea that if we don't have EW vehicles, we'll make the other vehicles in the formation the actual asset. So, for example, we're currently working on putting on every Abrams a layer of mesh network that allows us to put an EW sensor, pop it in the future TLS Manpack, for now just VMAX, that allows me to control as an EW professional away from the battlefield, out of the way of the maneuver elements, control an entire formation of EW sensors that are on that Abrams. The idea is to make it as simple as the Duke. We're joking it's the Duke Enhanced, or Dookie.
Don't say that, Chief.
Sorry. Yes. But the idea is all they have to do is just turn it on inside that vehicle, like you did when you're protecting yourself from RCIDs, and then someone in the further back in the formation is controlling that asset, so you don't have to worry about it. Because the idea is you can't hide a tank. And unlike other things we're trying to do with EW assets, a tank is a sledgehammer, not a scalpel. So what you do is you have an entire formation of eventually better jammers than VMAX that are pushing an objective and providing not only kinetic, but non-kinetic effects that'll just completely discombobulate that enemy on the objective. So you can't talk back to your rear headquarters. How do you find out what to do next? So you lose that coordination.
Hey, Chief, can I answer as well? Sure. Yeah, I think like from the Sergeant Major, from the 75th Ranger Regiment side, I think there are kind of 2 layers to this. You have the layer of, okay, obviously decision making is echeloned. So there you have squad leaders, platoon sergeants, PLs that can make a certain decision, company commanders, so on up the stack. And so I think we do a good job right now of how do I feed that data to a very tactical element, so like platoon and smaller. And a lot of that comes down to I have the people with the equipment in the right place to be able to sense the target that they think they're going to be looking for, and pass that to the person who can make the decision to either fire on it directly or call some sort of indirect capability to fire on it. I think where we're struggling, and I think this is potentially shared across the community, is when you are talking about a decision maker above, say, a company commander, and so you're talking about a battalion commander or their staff, or a brigade commander and their staff that is now making this decision because it's going in and being layered with other targets. I don't think we've necessarily gotten to what that 100% should be. There's so many challenges that we face between the number of sensors on the FLOT to how do I backhaul that data and the transport required to how do I integrate all that data together. And I think Colonel Bear was talking a lot about that and how they're looking at it from that perspective. And I think we're still, that's a work in progress for us.
All right, so we're experiencing a demand for high bandwidth beyond line of sight transport for cloud-based mission command systems and warfighter applications. So how can you folks in EM assure availability of that transport? Does that make sense?
Short answer, we can't, right? Long answer, right, is identification, right? Identifying those sources of interference, right? For neutralization through destructive means, hopefully, right? Or displacement, depending on how valuable that asset. I think the onus, right, is on building equipment that can live and exist in interference, unfortunately, right? Looking at the antenna design, mitigating it with terrain, right? Hard lines, like, unfortunately, right? Fiber networks, right? That edge compute, right? So not all that information is stovepiped, limiting that bandwidth, right? As far as like the analysis, like a typical system will get thousands of lobs or thousands of pieces of information, right? What really matters, right? That AI machine learning to extrapolate those critical pieces of information that has to go, and putting more emphasis on that packet prioritization, right? Especially when we go into like the TCP, right? We're gonna have to exist in UTP, right? So not all information may get there, but we need to identify what information is critical, especially when we look at HF transport data, right? Things that are a little bit more robust, but way less bandwidth than we typically have. But if anybody else has anything.
Yeah, so I know I'm just the moderator, but one of the things that the cyber school has looked at is EW counter EW as a concept. So this would reside within the counter EW realm, where how do we get our folks to do ES missions where it's focusing on locating these sources of EMI, particularly the intentional stuff, the jamming, deception type operations, and get the appropriate effects in place, probably kinetic in most cases, to delete those things off the battlefield, clear corridors and those type of things. So I think that's kind of where we can provide some assurance, knowing that our folks are getting trained on how to actually hunt these things down and open up the spectrum for different activities.
So I'm gonna go after this one as well. So I wrote down 2 notes from one of our transformation and contact experiments, and it was from the brigade's S6. 2 points. So obfuscation and masking of your blue signals, and see, sense, and understand. Right, and so a lot of times when we say see, sense, and understand, we're talking about it from an EW perspective of an adversary's capability for targeting purposes. But signal and the communications community has to understand that as well, so they know where not to be, right? And so it also means that the CMA section and the S6, G6 have to get a much closer relationship and a much better understanding of how each other does their missions and what they're trying to do. Because EW's whole job is understanding the adversary's capabilities in the EMS. And if I can give that to our signal community and say, hey, look, this is what their capabilities are, this is what they can and can't do, this is where they're at, this is what they're targeting, this is what they're after, then you can be able to change what you're doing to avoid a lot of that. And it's very difficult to go after a jammer unless you're going to blow it up, which is an option, of course. But that's something that needs to go into the planning process from the very beginning of the operation, and not just as an afterthought. So we really need to get signal and the CME community together in operations so that we understand what each other is trying to do and what each other's capabilities are.
Yeah, hey, I can't not speak on this. I mean, it's pretty much everything I've been talking about, right? And Chief, to your point, that's 100% right. You know what Signal's whole job is? Providing assured communications, right? And that happens through the staff collaboration. It's not an afterthought. And before SEMA existed, the 6 was doing it with the G3, right? And I'd ask that nowadays we default to the SEMA cell as everything EMS. Not us. I mean, maneuver commanders do, right? Because they have an 05 or an 06 in the G3 that they could talk to and say, hey, what is it? What is this about? What is all this about? And again, they're not responsible for freedom of maneuver in the EMS. They're responsible for denying that freedom of maneuver to potential adversaries. From electronic support perspective and electronic protect perspective, if we're not all at the same table, we're doing our organizations a disservice. And I think echelons above reality at core and above kind of understand that. I think where the Army's seeing that problem is at division and below. And we have to do better at educating not only the maneuver commanders, but also our 3 sections and our 6 sections on what that unity of effort looks like and what they actually deliver is force multiplication as opposed to fratricide, which is where we're finding ourselves now at the tactical level.
Great point. I think we have enough time for probably one more question and then a wrap up.
Yeah, Tom Bailey. So as an old cavalryman, I got 2 questions, 2 parts. First, your sensor to shooter to target, how long are you looking at that engagement happening? And the second one is, as an old squadron commander, we suffered through all these spot reports coming in all the time. And the way the teams that I was with and all the training we got was, how are you guys leveraging the commander's critical information requirements to zero in on those spot reports that are coming through now the digital network versus when it was an analog, but voice, to be able to say that's the target, take it out, or keep your eyes on it? Because some of that seems to me is and that goes back to your planning. Pretty much you probably need a signal battalion again with a maneuver commander and a division. That's what this is all showing. But anyway, I look forward to hearing your answer.
So for the sensor to shooter piece, so we put a lot of effort into teaching the soldiers what is something we don't want to send up versus what we do. So if I have a line of bearing that goes back towards my company headquarters, obviously I'm not going to send that up. So part of that is just training the soldier to understand what is and what is not actionable, what is actionable. For the CCIR piece, a lot of it has to do with more or less understanding what it is that he's asking for, like reading between the lines. Sometimes it's just kill the tanks. I need a little more than that. So working with the S2 and deciding what piece of what asset on the battlefield for the enemy could I take out that would answer that CCIR. So a lot of that is just is proper staffing and training for that staffing. Anyone else want to cover it?
What we did is, the mission's important, all that stuff, but I personally, and all squadron commanders that I knew, they were in there developing it, saying, hey, 3 tanks is interesting, but is that the identification of the advance guard? That's the question that we would ask our scouts to answer. So we get into that detail is what I'm asking.
So I would actually have a sit down. I have had sit downs with my commander to say, hey, for what you want out of me, the CCR you provided, where you want to dominate the EMS for this specific objective, what does that look like for you? And you say, okay, well, what's on the battlefield? And I give them that idea, and we just have that conversation back and forth. I know not everyone has that ability to talk to their commander, or maybe he's just a little bit too busy. But it was a back and forth of just playing devil's advocate to say, okay, sir, so you say you want a jammer gone, but what exactly do you want to obtain by saying you want that jammer gone? And so he'd ask for freedom of movement inside the EMS and forest communications. So for us, it's just been a back and forth conversation.
So a lot of that is actually a targeting question for the fires community. If they're going to do a deliberate targeting process, and you're going to have engagement criteria that's already been decided by the commander, then your speed can be machine speed, right? If you've already got planned assets against it, then as fast as we can get that information and process it into the hands of the fires community with the final decision saying, hey, yep, we're shooting it, and that's where we're going to go. A lot of that is going to be, involved in big data models, transport of large amounts of data, AI, ML of looking through that data and figuring out which ones are important to us right now. But that's kind of the future plan of how we're going to do that. Now, the commander always gets to say, and we're never going to have a system that just automatically starts shooting at things, but that's kind of the process. So hopefully it's just something as quick as popping into the commander's office wherever and saying, hey, we found what you were looking for, can we shoot it? And they make that decision on the spot and they get shot.
So in terms of CCIRs, from my perspective, right, that's going to be staff developed process. Oh, you were going to go? Oh, sorry, cut you off. I wasn't looking. But as far as the spectrum, right, we're never going to be that one tool to identify a CP, right? Potentially, if we see multiple bands of communications, but if like formations, right, they're going to be your ambiguity. They're all going to be running on the same spectrum because they're a platoon, right? So we're never going to be able to do that. We're going to have to tip and cue other ISR platforms, IC, to try to develop that picture, right, to identify a CCR. We're really looking at a huge geometry of a battlefield, and we're reducing it to a kilometer, right? And then that's when we get the two community to say, hey, can we go look at this? Does this align with some of the enemy course of actions, enemy sit temp that you identified? Can this be something a little more important, or is it anything that we should look at a little bit more with a greater lens?
Yeah, let Colonel Bear have the final word on this one.
I say part of this depends on what echelon you're operating at, right? So within the brigade, you're mostly looking at comms emitters, adversary comms emitters, trying to locate those to target. At the division and corps level, looking in the deep fight, so we're talking 30 to 200K beyond the flot, right? I'm looking at a lot of a different target set. There's some comms in there where I'm looking for FDCs and other things, but a lot of what the Corps and the division are looking for are ELINT type things, radars, those type things, right? So at the division and Corps, a lot of that is already planned out on the attack guidance matrix. We've identified those things as high payoff target list, and the commander has essentially already given us the guidance. These are the things I want you to take off the battlefield, and whatever source finds it, then the FAO and the targeting community determines what's going to service it, right? But that's the staff work done ahead of time that puts it into the attack guidance matrix. And that's one area where we need to get better over time, right? Because usually our attack guidance matrix is mostly the kinetic engagements. We need to get better at layering the options of non-kinetic engagements to either set the conditions so we can do a kinetic strike, or until I can kinetically strike it, I need to disrupt it or deny it for a period of time.
All right, that concludes our panel. First of all, I'd like to thank the panelists for their insightful input to the questions. Secondly, I'd like to thank the audience for their participation and fielding good questions and listening to what we had to say. We covered a wide variety of topics, everything from AI to policy to acquisition. And I think that, that kind of describes the complexity of transformation and contact, especially when it comes to the EMS. So we'll be available throughout the TechNet. So if you have any other questions or clarification on something, we're willing to help you out. Thank you.
Awesome.